There was a man who came to me in the autumn of his 40th year, and he sat in the chair across from mine with a strange exhaustion of one who had been running for a long time without knowing from what. He told me that his sleep had become restless, that the same dream returned 3 nights in a row, a dream in which he descended a stone staircase into a flooded basement, and at the bottom of the water, something golden glinted beneath the surface. He laughed nervously after telling me this, as men often do when they have just confessed something they did not yet understand. And I remember leaning back in my chair and saying nothing for a long while, because I knew what he did not yet know, that his life was about to change, and the change had already begun beneath the floorboards of his awareness. The unconscious, you see, never announces itself with trumpets. It whispers, it dreams, it disturbs the small habits of the day until the dreamer is forced to look down into the water. I have spent the greater part of my life listening to such confessions, and I came to understand slowly and against my own reluctance that the psyche prepares a man for transformation long before the man himself has any inkling of what is coming. The soul is always ahead of the mind. When something great is about to be born in a human life, a vocation, a love, a confrontation with the self, a death that is also a beginning. The unconscious begins to rearrange the furniture of the inner house. Doors that were locked begin to creak open in dreams. Faces from the past return without explanation. The man who once felt at home in his life suddenly feels as though he is a stranger in his own kitchen. These are the labor pains of becoming, and yet the modern man, and I say this with sorrow rather than judgment, has lost their ear for these whispers. He medicates his restlessness. He drowns his strange dreams in the noise of his devices. He calls his disquiet stress and seeks to eliminate it as one would eliminate a pest, never suspecting that the disquiet itself is the messenger of his own salvation. The ancients knew better. They built temples to receive such messages. They consulted oracles. They read the entrails of birds. They descended into the cave of the Sibyl. We have nothing of the kind now, and so the messages must come to us in the only way they still can, through the symptom, through the dream, through the inexplicable longing that visits us at 3 o'clock in the morning when the rational mind has gone to sleep and the older mind is finally permitted to speak. But the most surprising thing I came to understand was this: the signs are not random and they are not many. Over the decades, in my work with patients, in my own self-analysis, in the testimony of mystics and alchemists, I observed that the unconscious tends to announce a great transformation through 5 distinct signs, 5 movements, if you will, of a single underground symphony. When these 5 appear together, not all at once, but woven into the same season of a life, then one may know that something large is approaching from the depths. Something is being prepared. Something is about to be given. And the task of the conscious person is not to force this gift, nor to flee from it, but to recognize the signs and to make oneself ready. The first sign, and perhaps the most disorienting, is what I came to call the death of the old enthusiasms. A man would come to me and say, "Doctor, I no longer enjoy the things I used to enjoy. The work that once consumed me has become ashes in my mouth. The friendships that once nourished me feel hollow. The pleasures I pursued for 20 years now bore me beyond endurance." And he would tell me this with shame, as though he were confessing a moral failure. But I would tell him, and I tell you now, that this is not the death of life. It is the death of a life that has finished its work. The psyche is not depressed. The psyche is molting. The old shell is cracking because something new is preparing to emerge. And the new cannot wear the clothing of the old. The alchemists, those strange and patient men whose laboratories I studied for so many years, had a name for this stage. They called it the nigredo, the blackening, the putrefaction, the necessary rotting of the first matter before any transformation could occur. They drew images of kings dying, of suns turning black, of bodies dissolving in dark waters. They did not draw these images out of morbidity. They drew them because they had observed that nothing new is ever made except through the death of what came before. The seed must rot before the tree can grow. The caterpillar must dissolve into a kind of soup before the butterfly can be assembled from its remains. And the human soul, when it is preparing for a great becoming, must first endure the loss of the meanings that no longer serve it. I remember a woman, a painter of considerable talent, who came to me weeping because she could no longer paint. The brush, she said, had become dead in her hand. For 20 years, painting had been her religion, and now the religion had emptied itself of God. She believed she was finished as an artist. And what I told her was that her gift was not leaving her. Her gift was outgrowing the form she had given it. The painting she had been making belonged to a woman she no longer was. 6 months later, after a long descent that frightened us both, she began to paint again, but differently. The new work was unrecognizable as hers, and yet it was, for the first time, entirely her own. What mythology has been trying to tell us for centuries is precisely this paradox, that the hero must die before the hero can return. Inanna descended into the underworld and was hung on a hook for 3 days. Christ was sealed in the tomb. The shaman, in his initiatory illness, was torn to pieces by the spirits before he could be reassembled as a healer. These are accurate descriptions of an interior process that every soul undergoes when it is being prepared for a larger life. If you find yourself in a season where the old enthusiasms have died, do not despair. Do not rush to revive the corpse. The new is being prepared in a room you cannot yet enter. The second sign is one that frightens people more than they admit, because it touches the borders of what the rational mind permits itself to acknowledge. I am speaking of the strange increase in meaningful coincidences, what I came after long hesitation to call synchronicity. A woman dreams of a yellow bird, and the next morning a yellow bird strikes her window. A man thinks of an old friend he has not seen in 20 years, and that afternoon the friend telephones him from across the ocean. You read a sentence in a book, and the same sentence appears hours later in a conversation overheard on a train. The rational mind dismisses these events as accidents of probability. But when they begin to cluster, when they begin to weave themselves into the texture of your days with a density that exceeds the patience of chance, then something else is at work. I came to believe, after many years of resistance to my own observations, that synchronicity is the way in which the unconscious announces its alignment with the outer world. In seasons of great inner preparation, the boundary between the inner and the outer becomes permeable. The psyche reaches out into the world, and the world reaches back. The meaning of a coincidence is the fingerprint of this meeting. And I noticed with great consistency that such coincidences multiply in the months before a major transformation. The future is, in some sense, already present, and it is leaving signs in the present like a deer leaves tracks in the snow. The hunter who knows how to read tracks will know where the deer is going. Here begins the darkest game of the unconscious, for synchronicities, when one begins to notice them, can also drive a person to madness if they are misunderstood. I have seen patients who, having opened themselves to the symbolic life, began to see meaning in everything, in license plates, in the number of birds on a wire, in the color of a stranger's coat. This is not synchronicity. This is the inflation of the ego that has confused itself with the self. True synchronicity has weight. It carries with it a feeling that the soul recognizes a kind of inward bowing, a quiet knowing. The false synchronicity has the frantic quality of a mind grasping for significance. The proper response to a true synchronicity is not interpretation, but reception. One does not solve a synchronicity as one solves a riddle. One holds it, as one holds a stone found on a beach, turning it, feeling its weight, allowing it to speak in its own time, and one writes it down. The unconscious is offering you a thread. If you do not record the thread, you will lose it. Keep a notebook, mark the day, note the coincidence, because I observed again and again that synchronicities arrive in sequences, and the sequence forms a pattern, and the pattern is the shape of what is being born in you. The bird at the window was a chapter title in a book you are only now beginning to read. The third sign is the return of figures from the past, and I do not mean only literal figures, though those too. I mean the return in dreams and in waking memory of people and places that the conscious mind had long since filed away as concluded. The grandfather who died when you were 12 appears in 3 dreams in a single month, speaking to you with a gravity he never possessed in life. The childhood home, which you have not visited in decades, becomes the setting of a recurring dream in which you wander from room to room, searching for something you cannot name. An old teacher, an old lover, a sibling from whom you are estranged, they begin to populate your inner world with a frequency that cannot be explained by the ordinary workings of memory. What is happening in such a season is that the psyche is gathering its materials. Before a great transformation, the soul takes inventory. It returns to the places where energy was once invested and was perhaps left behind, abandoned in unfinished business, in unmourned losses, in unintegrated experiences. The dead grandfather is bringing back to you some piece of your own soul that was left in his keeping. The childhood home is a vault that holds something you will need for the next stage of your life. The old lover who appears in your dreams is rarely about the lover. She is about the part of yourself that you encountered through her and that you must now reclaim as your own. The detail most people overlook hides precisely here. They mistake these returns for nostalgia, for regression, for the sentimental weakness of a mind that has begun to age. And so they push the images away. But I observed, with a consistency that became a kind of law in my clinical work, that those who refused to greet these returning figures remained stuck, and those who welcomed them, who asked them what they had come to say, found that the figures eventually departed, leaving behind some treasure that had been theirs to deliver. The unconscious does not waste its visits. Every figure that returns is returning for a reason. There is something here that you must take with you into what comes next. I think of the old Egyptian practice of the ka, the soul double that was thought to require the offerings of the living for its sustenance. The Egyptians understood, in their symbolic genius, that the dead are not finished with us, nor we with them. There are aspects of our own being that are entrusted to the figures of our past, and these aspects must be reclaimed before the soul can move forward whole. When these figures begin to return to your dreams in the months before a transformation, they are bringing your car back to you. Honor them, speak to them in your imagination. Ask them what they want. The answer will surprise you, and the answer will prepare you. The fourth sign, and the one that troubles even the most stable temperaments, is the eruption of what I came to call the inner restlessness, a peculiar agitation that has no external cause and that cannot be soothed by any of the usual remedies. The man who experiences this restlessness will tell you that he is, by every objective measure, fortunate. His work is going well. His family is intact. His health is sound. And yet he wakes at 4 a.m. with his heart beating against his ribs as though it were trying to escape the cage of his chest. He paces his house. He cannot concentrate on the book in his hands. He feels, in the words of one of my patients, as though something enormous was standing just behind me, breathing on the back of my neck. This restlessness is one of the most misunderstood phenomena in the modern psyche. It is routinely diagnosed as anxiety, treated with sedatives, suppressed with all the resources of contemporary medicine. And in some cases, anxiety is what it is. But I observe that beneath this clinical anxiety, there often runs a deeper current, what the medieval mystics called the appetitus animae, the appetite of the soul. The soul, when it senses that the larger life is being prepared for it, becomes hungry. It paces the corridors of the body like a caged animal that has smelled the forest. To medicate this hunger, without first asking what it is hungry for, is to silence the very voice that was attempting to lead the person home. What Jung said about this is deeply unsettling. Neurosis in its essence is the suffering of a soul that has not yet found its meaning. And the restlessness I am describing is the early form of this suffering, the form it takes before it has become illness, while it is still a question rather than a diagnosis. The proper response to such restlessness is not to silence it, but to interrogate it, to sit with it, to ask it in the silence of one's own room what it wants, and to be prepared for the answer to be inconvenient, because the soul rarely asks for what the ego has already planned. I knew a banker once, a man of considerable success and seemingly unshakable composure, who came to me because he could no longer sleep. The doctors had given him every pill in the cabinet, and none of them worked. He would lie in bed and feel, he said, as though a thread were tied to his sternum and someone were pulling it gently but insistently towards something he could not see. We worked together for many months. He followed the thread, and what the thread led to his astonishment, was that he had been meant all his life to be a musician. He had played the piano as a child and had been forbidden by his father to pursue it. He had buried this knowledge so thoroughly that he had forgotten it. The restlessness was the buried musician trying to escape the grave. When he began at 53 years old to play again, the restlessness departed. The fifth sign is perhaps the most subtle, and for that reason the most easily missed. It is what I have come to think of as the thinning of the veil, a quality that descends in certain seasons of a life upon the ordinary world. Color seems slightly more saturated than usual. The face of a stranger on the street strikes you with an inexplicable significance. A piece of music you have heard 100 times suddenly opens a door in your chest that you did not know was there. The world, without changing in any measurable way, becomes more itself, and you cannot account for it. You have not begun a new medication. You have not fallen in love, and yet the veil between you and the world has grown thin, and through it something is shining. The real turning point begins right here, because this thinning of the veil is not a neurological accident. It is the announcement that the psyche has opened itself in preparation for what is coming. The unconscious has lifted by a small degree the curtain that ordinarily separates the conscious mind from the deeper layers of being. And through that opening, the world appears as it more truly is, saturated with meaning, alive with significance, charged with what the old theologians used to call the glory. This is the state in which mystics have always reported their revelations. This is the state in which artists have produced their greatest works. This is the state in which the soul recognizes that it is participating in something larger than itself. I have observed that this thinning often accompanies the other four signs, and that it is often the last to appear before the great transformation arrives. It is the soul's way of saying, be ready, pay attention. What is about to happen will require you to be awake. And the tragedy of the modern person is that this state, when it descends, is so unfamiliar that it is often mistaken for something pathological. The person feels too much, the world is too vivid, and so the person rushes to restore the ordinary numbness, to thicken the veil again, to return to the safety of the muted world. In doing so, he closes the very door through which his transformation was attempting to enter. If I could offer one counsel to those who find themselves in such a season, it would be this: do not run from the vividness. Sit in it, walk through your days with it. Let the colors be as saturated as they are. Let the music open whatever doors it opens. The veil has thinned for a reason. Something is approaching from the other side. The mystics did not seek the thinning of the veil because they wanted unusual experiences. They sought it because they understood that all true becoming requires a period of porousness in which the soul is permeable enough to be remade. Now, when these 5 signs gather together in a single season of a life, the death of the old enthusiasms, the increase of meaningful coincidence, the return of figures from the past, the eruption of inner restlessness, and the thinning of the veil, then something extraordinary is at hand. I do not say this lightly. I say it as one who has watched, over the course of 50 years of clinical practice, the same pattern repeat itself in lives as different from one another as a peasant's and a poet's. The pattern belongs to the deep structure of the human psyche, to what I came to call the collective unconscious, that great underground river of images and energies that connects every soul that has ever lived. And the pattern is announcing, in the only language it knows how to speak, that you are being prepared. Prepared for what, you may ask? I cannot tell you what specifically is coming, because what is coming is the unique destiny of your own life. But I can tell you what is always coming in some form when these 5 signs appear together. What is coming is what I called individuation, the slow, difficult, miraculous process by which a person becomes who they truly were meant to be. Not the person their parents wanted, not the person their society rewarded, not the person their fear constructed in order to be safe, but the person who lives at the center of their own being, who has met their shadow and integrated it, who has reconciled the opposites within themselves, who has discovered the self that lies beneath the ego and lives from that deeper ground. This is the great gift the unconscious is preparing to give you, and it does not give it cheaply. The alchemists knew this. They spoke of the work as a thing that took a lifetime, and that produced at the end the lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone. They did not mean a literal stone. They meant the integrated personality, the soul that had passed through the fire and emerged whole. They drew the image of the conjunction, the marriage of the king and queen, the union of the masculine and feminine principles within a single being. They drew the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, to symbolize the wholeness of a self that has gathered all its scattered parts. These were not metaphors for chemistry. These were maps of the inner journey, and the 5 signs I have described are the early stations on that journey, the signs that the work has begun, even if the worker does not yet know it. I want to say one more thing before I close. The 5 signs are frightening. They produce in nearly everyone who experiences them a temptation to run, to return to the old life, to medicate the symptoms, to fill the silence with noise, to take a new lover, to buy a new house, to start a new project, anything to avoid the descent that is being asked. There has never been a civilization more skilled at preventing transformation than ours. We have entertainments for every hour. We have distractions for every impulse. We have 1,000 bright doors leading away from the one dark door that would lead us home. But the dark door is the only door that matters. And the 5 signs are the lamps that have been lit by some intelligence deeper than our own to show us where the door is. To refuse the signs is to refuse one's own becoming. To follow them even partway is to begin the journey that every soul in the end must make. And the journey is not a destruction. It is a homecoming. It is the long way back to the person you already were, before the world taught you to forget. The unconscious is your oldest friend, who has been waiting patiently in the basement of your life, holding for you the gold you lost when you were too small to know its value. The 5 signs are the friend knocking on the floorboards. The friend is saying, "It is time, come down." So I will leave you with the question that I have left with so many who sat in the chair across from mine in the long evenings when the fire was low and the hour had grown late. What signs have been visiting you that you have not yet named? What old enthusiasm has been dying in you that you have refused to mourn? Whose face has been returning to your dreams? What restlessness has been waking you at 4 in the morning? When did the world last appear to you, even for a moment, saturated and vivid and unaccountably alive? These are the threshold questions. And whether you cross the threshold or remain on this side of it is, in the end, the only question your life will ever truly ask of you. The unconscious has been preparing something for you. The only question that remains is whether you will be ready to receive it.